Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Or I guess it's afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all once again for joining us in our fifth installment and the first of 2021 of our Real Talk for Real Change Equity Symposium series on the power of real talk to make real change. I first want to acknowledge that the University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land. It's a place their nation has called Day Job since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. And today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. I make this acknowledgments not for the sake of ritual, but to demonstrate respect for Indigenous peoples and recognize their enduring relationship to the land, and to continuously raise awareness about histories that are often suppressed and or forgotten. And to that tune, we also recognize that this month is Black History Month. And at its core, I believe Black History Month is an acknowledgement of 400 plus years of African Americans' fight and struggle for full citizenship rights in this country. At times, I feel we've dumbed it down to be sort of a smorgasbord of Black culture where we highlight folks like George Washington Carver, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Rosa Parks. You know, we sing some songs and we dance a little bit. And I think that's important, but it should also be a time of recognition of folks who are continuing to do this work rather than highlighting just a few, albeit important, historical contributions to Black excellence. So Black History Month to me is every month, as we as a people have historically and continue to contribute to significant pockets of excellence within this country and beyond. And so I'm very excited about today. My name is LeVar Charleston. I'm one of the associate deans here in the School of Education, and I direct our Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or OEDI as we call it. And my colleagues in the School of Education's Office of Professional Learning and Community Education, also known as PLACE, have been on a journey with me as we embark upon this Real Talk for Real Change Equity Symposium series, whose goal is to identify areas of overlap between public issues and concerns and campus and community strengths. Collectively, PLACE and OEDI, through our RTRC series, our Real Talk for Real Change series, leverages the expertise of faculty, staff, and community stakeholders to focus on critical issues of racial justice in education and beyond. And we do this by centering the voices of UW-Madison scholars and community members of color. So we're excited to continue in this series that have brought together over 1,000 campus and community constituents to engage in critical discourse that encourages action, accountability, and commitment toward diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging among campus, local, regional, and national communities. Today, we bring together a diverse group of experts and practitioners who have found meaningful, impactful, powerful ways to utilize their voices to enact real, tangible, substantive change while addressing some of the most difficult and challenging issues related to equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-discrimination that is within our society. As an educator and an administrator myself, I believe in the power of activism, the effective use of our voices to push for and achieve systemic change that upends the lasting effects of racism that negatively impact ourselves and our future generation of leaders. So I'm not going to belabor the issue because we're in for a treat with some truly talented panelists who are going to shepherd us through the art of the power of real talk to make real change and leave us with some new tools in our toolkit for engaging in the tough conversations that lead to action and accountability. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce our coordinating committee, whom I regularly brain wrestle with as we endeavor to put together high quality events. First, Dr. Rich Halverson. Dr. Halverson is the Associate Dean for Innovation, Outreach, and Partnerships, and Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis in the UW-Madison School of Education. His research aims to bring the research methods and practices of the learning sciences to the world of educational leadership and interactive media. Rich is the founder of the Comprehensive Assessment of Leadership for Learning project and was a co-founder and co-director of the Games Learning Society Research Center. He's a former high school teacher and administrator. Next, we have Dr. Uriel Lashley. Dr. Lashley is the Director of Arts in the Office of Professional Learning and Community Education. And Uriel is a developmental psychologist interested in self-efficacy and social-emotional learning in arts, academic and integrated environments, as well as the founder and director of Drum Power, which teaches social-emotional learning through music. And finally, we have Dr. Barker, who will introduce our panelists for today and will also serve as a co-facilitator for today's symposium. Dr. Barker is the Education Director for PLACE, where she translates UW-Madison's educational research into professional and community learning opportunities. She received her PhD in Curriculum and Teacher Education from Stanford University, was a teacher educator at Stanford, SUNY New Paltz, and Towson University, and began her career as an English reading and drama teacher at James Lick High School in San Jose, California. At this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Barker. Lisa?
Thank you, Dr. Charleston, and welcome everyone. Please know that we've placed in the chat a link to our live captioning services, which you're welcome to use anytime, and we'll put that back in the chat periodically for folks who need to hop in and out of the event. On the next slide, we wanted to orient you to the architecture of our time together. Right now, we're in pasture number 2, if you will. In a moment, I'm gonna introduce you to the questions that are gonna anchor our conversations, as well as to our 5 panelists. There'll be moments for them to respond to the questions, and then a large amount of time for y'all to pop questions in the chat that we can raise up and have our panelists respond to. Then we'll have some closing thoughts, and then we have a feedback survey that we'll link to toward the end of the event, and we really welcome any feedback you can provide, which helps us get better and better. So in the next slide, if you will, these are the main questions that we'll be unpacking together. We want to come together to find a definition for real talk, what that looks like in our careers and in our personal and professional lives, as well as once we have real talk, how do we move that into real change? In the next slide, I wanted to leave that up so you can see our panelists as I read for you their bios. And I'm going to read them in the order that the panelists are going to be speaking in just a minute. I'm so excited about these good folks. Terrence L Green is an associate professor of educational leadership and policy at the University of Texas at Austin. His research examines the relationship between educational leadership, schools, and neighborhood communities with a focus on racial and educational equity. Supported by the William T. Grant Foundation, Professor Green is currently conducting a study that examines the impacts of 160 school districts' racial equity policies on Black students' experiences and outcomes. He's a former high school science teacher and received his PhD from UW-Madison's Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis. Mariana Castro is the Deputy Director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research in UW-Madison School of Education. She brings over 25 years of experience in education to her research and development work, and almost 15 years as a leader at WIDA, an organization committed to the advancement in advocacy and education on behalf of multilingual learners. Her research examines language practices of multilingual students, issues of curriculum and instruction in dual language immersion programs, and teacher professional learning. Baron Kelly is a professor of acting in UW-Madison's Department of Theater and Drama, an appointment concurrent with a role in the Department of Continuing Studies Odyssey Project. An internationally recognized critic, historian, practitioner, and scholar, he has published widely and is a 4-time Fulbright scholar who has appeared nationally and internationally, including Broadway, television, and film. He is the author of the book, An Actor's Task, Engaging the Senses. Dana Pelaban is a community activist and co-executive director of the Rape Crisis Center in Dane County, where she leads their counseling and advocacy services and coordinates community partnerships for county-wide sexual assault victim services. She is currently on the board of directors for Outreach LGBTQ+ Center and World Builders. She has extensive experience working with persons experiencing homelessness through her work as the director of housing and operations for Porchlight. Her activism extends to all aspects of her life as a theater professional, the co-founder of the Loud and Unchained Black Theater Festival, and the owner of the Madison Theater Collective. And finally, Alex G. is the lead pastor of Fountain of Life Covenant Church, a multiracial, multi-generational, and multi-class congregation in Madison, Wisconsin. In 1992, he pioneered the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development, a nonprofit organization that inspires, develops, and mobilizes emerging African-American leaders to become partners in revitalizing and transforming the community. G nudged his local community to rethink racial disparities in Madison, Wisconsin by launching a citywide movement called Justified Anger. He is a published author of 2 books, an adjunct faculty member, a podcast host, spiritual life coach, and proud to be the husband, brother, father, and son of UW-Madison graduates. We are so thrilled to have y'all with us, and I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Dr. Charleston.
I have been waiting for this opportunity all year. I am so excited to be here in dialogue with you all, and so excited for everyone who has chosen to join in with us today. Dr. Green, Dr. Terrence Green, I have had the pleasure of following your work for a number of years and have observed the impact that you have made both in the academy and in the community. So when we think about real talk, when we say the term real talk, what do you mean by real talk? And we're wondering if you can give us an example from your work of what this looks like.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Charleston, and everybody, Dr. Halverson, everybody who brought us and invited us here. It's such an honor to be back. I feel like it's almost like a virtual homecoming. I did my graduate work in Madison, attended Dr. G's church, so I'm so happy to be here. I started my timer, so I'll make sure I stay within time. But when I think about real talk, I think a couple of things come to mind. First, I believe real talk is contextually situated, and what real talk actually is should emerge from the people within that context. But as I think about it as it relates to my work, I think about a couple of things. So one of the things I remember learning at UW, my advisor, Colleen Cap, used to always ask us to ask these 2 questions: for whom and to what ends, right? So when we think about real talk, one of my questions is like, real talk for whom, right? And then the other was like, real talk to what ends? And I know we're talking about change. So there are 3 things I think that anchor this for me. So the first thing is this, is that real talk is not based on preserving white comfort, nor is it based on preserving white feelings. But the goal of real talk is to dismantle racism. It is to confront anti-Blackness, and it's to confront white supremacy. And people say, well, that's so uncomfortable. And my rebuttal always back is like, you know what else is uncomfortable? Racism is uncomfortable. You know what else is uncomfortable? When I'm riding and the police ride up by me, I get tense and my heart rate starts going up, right? So when we think about real talk, it's not predicated on white comfort or on white people's feelings, but it is predicated on targeting and confronting racism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness. The second component, I think, that goes into real talk, you can't engage in no real talk if you're not going to engage in truth telling, right? You have to be able to tell the truth if you're going to do real talk. So when I think about truth telling, when I'm working with schools or districts or when I'm teaching in class, I think truth telling, you have to hold 2 practices in tension, and that is grace and truth. So if I only give you grace and no truth, it can lead to complacency. But if I only tell you the truth and I don't have any grace, and if I don't have a relationship with you, it can lead to alienation, right? So the goal here is to engage in radical truth telling, and part of real talk is radical truth telling, right? And so I think of this quote from Dr. King in his book, Why We Can't Wait, which is, I think, one of the most amazing books, one of my favorite books. And he has this line in there on page 63. He says, like a boil that must be open to all its ugliness, to the natural medicines of the air, in light of injustice, it must be exposed to the light of human consciousness in order to be cured. So in other words, like, we have to engage in truth telling in order to have real talk. I think the other thing about real talk is that you realize that real talk is not based on, that real talk in and of itself is insufficient to disrupt white supremacy, right? One of the things I always like to tell them in class is like, You don't learn how to swim by just sitting on the side of the pool. You don't even learn how to swim by just sitting on the side of the pool having conversations. You don't learn how to swim by just sitting on the side of the pool reading books. And it is amazing when racism and when Black people and other people of color are experiencing racial injustice, the automatic response, and is a white supremacy response in my eyes, is to have a conversation. And so what you realize is that real talk, people understand that having a conversation in and of itself is not enough to dismantle structures of oppression. And so what real talk really gets at, it moves beyond this notion of like, does racism exist? Or I have privilege, or I have white privilege, to a place of confronting the conditions that allow for whiteness and for white privilege to continually be perpetuated in our systems, in our classrooms, in our families, and in our institutions, right? And so that's what I think of when I think about real talk. And I have comments and thoughts about like change and all that stuff, but those are my initial thoughts.
Okay, okay. What was our time on that? Someone tell me, because I really want to know as well too, your thoughts around how this can lead to real change, right? And an example from your work. I meant to ask you that at the beginning.
Gotcha. Yeah, so all right, so now how do we think about real talk and change? All right, so I think the first thing that we have to name and acknowledge is that Black people, Indigenous folks, have been engaged in real talk for ages, and it has led to persecution, prosecution, and execution, right? And so like we've been talking, we've been talking 100, we've been talking for real. And so for me, if we're talking about how do we move this to change, the question isn't how do we get people to engage in real talk? The question is not how, but it is who. So in other words, every school that I have worked with, every school district that I have been able to partner with, there was already someone who was engaged in real talk. It was the Black mother, it was the youth, it was the custodial worker, it was the teacher on the second floor. But those voices were marginalized, those voices were erased, and those voices were muted. So if we're going to engage in real talk that will actually lead to some type of change, then we have to, number one, find out who the people are who are already engaged in that. And we have to center that voice, not just include it, because we're like, well, we need inclusion. Inclusion to what end? Like just being included in white supremacy? Or we need to be able to belong. Belong to what? Belong to the same institution that has continued to put Black boys in special education over and over again. And so that first part, I think we have to start to ask the question of who is engaged in that, and we build around that. I think the second thing, this is a great book from Austin Shannon Brown, wrote this book, Still Here, about race. And she makes this compelling argument around conversation and around dialogue. And she says, like, real dialogue and real conversation, it has to do three things. Like, if we want to really engage in real talk for lasting change. The first one is like, it has to lead to some type of action. The second thing is like, real talk actually inverts the dynamics of power, right? So it amazes me. Like, we have a gazillion, like, people will engage in a courageous conversation, but I'm like, when you gonna take some courageous actions, right? And so inversion of the power dynamic means that we have to ask the questions like, who are making the decisions? Who controlling the money? Who is the one that's setting the agenda, right? The power dynamics. And so real talk, if we want to have lasting change, it should actually invert, or it should switch the dynamics of power. Who is setting curriculum? Who is creating what relationships, what families and what communities look like, right? So she argues that you must take action. She argues that it must be an inversion of power. And then the third thing she argues is that it must lead to justice, like racial justice, right? So we must make sure that all of our conversations are anchored to those ends. Earlier, I asked the question like, to what ends? Because those are the things that we need to be thinking about. But there's a fourth piece I think that goes with this. In 1963-64, James Baldwin wrote a letter to teachers. And one of the things that he wrote in that letter is he called teachers, he said, like, you got to be willing to go for broke, right? So for me, how does real conversation lead to change? Like, organizations, school districts, universities, businesses must be willing to go for broke. In other words, you must be willing enough through the conversation as a lever or entry point to now go for broke in your organization in terms of divesting from whiteness, divesting from white supremacy, paying back what Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings calls this education debt, right? Like, we have to be willing to go for broke. And here's the reality. That system, it isn't broke. It's working the way that it was created to function. I'm thinking of an inequitable education system. So we must be willing to go for broke. Then the third point, real quickly, this idea about identifying the pinch points was one of the questions. I think part of that, what we have to do is how do we identify where the pinch points are to lead for change? We have to listen to the people and center the people who are most directly impacted by racism, right? Or racial injustice. And so it flips the dynamic of power, right? And so I think centering that is very important. Then the very last thing I would say, how do we engage in real talk that leads to lasting change? One of the things I've been writing about in this book is like, people have to get to practicing. Like, it's not just having a theory that informs what you do. It's not just engaging in action, but it's not just engaging in reflection. It is the co-mingling and the intersection of all of those things coming together. And when we engage in praxis, then the conversations that we have are predicated and based on things that we've actually done. And so the conversation is richer. Going back to the swimming example, you don't learn how to swim by sitting on the side of the pool. But when you get in the pool and you start sinking, now when you come back to have the conversation with your coach and community and collaboration, now the conversation is being informed by actual action. And so one of the things that we often do in schools, we have a change hearts and minds strategy, which I'm just like beyond it at this point. I think any system of real talk that's set up on persuasion, to me, at some point becomes a lost cause, because we've been trying to persuade people for 400 years in this country, right? And so the thing is, like, people have to get practicing. Like, you have to start doing something. And as you're doing something, the reflection that you're engaged in elicits much richer conversation that can lead to significant and lasting change. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Look, you got me going. I'm taking notes a mile a minute. And you got us going, Dr. Green. We appreciate your thoughts. You know, it's funny you talk about sort of the conversation and the actions that take place, and one of our guests we have who does work on language, and so as we think about sort of the idea around real talk, border crossing, challenging oppression and systems in that way, what I want to talk to Dr. Castro and ask her, you know, when you employ real talk in your own area, you know, what do you mean by that, and how can, and what sort of example from your work can you give us, and how does that lead to real change as well? So I want to probe you on that, Dr. Castro.
Thank you. Wow, going after Dr. Green is really tough, but so here we go. Real talk to me is about vulnerability. To engage in real talk, one must be courageous, right? You take risks, you're honest, and you're open as possible. In some ways, I live in both the academic world and the praxis that we were talking about. And academic work is challenging, but we get time to theorize. We get time to think, to reflect, to be witnesses, and to be storytellers. Action, like Dr. Green was saying, is what is important, what is crucial. And it is hard to do in professional environments, because sometimes you take risks and you fall flat. In a professional environment, and especially in positions of leadership, people expect you to appear sure, confident, and have it all together. Yet, if we truly knew the right answers, the issues we have today would have been solved a long ago. And this is exactly why we need real talk. As Dr. Green, I also have all my little notes, you know, we've been at this for a long time. As a leader of color, these filters and these attitudes become scarier. If you are the first person of color in your particular position, you know you're representing others, you know you're paving the way for others, and it may feel like you're standing on the shoulders of your ancestors. And if you are, well, so when you fall, you're actually falling from a high altitude. So recognizing real talk and recognizing safe spaces for real talk is critical, because it is in those spaces where real talk happens and when change happens. So one of the questions is like, how do you know when you see it? And this reminds me of Du Bois' double consciousness, right? As a social recognition of social situations in which you find yourself, especially as a person of color. And Du Bois was paying critical attention to experiences of inequities, prejudice, and segregation for our Black brothers and sisters. And it is those common experiences of social injustice that may allow people of color to recognize the opposite, right? The situations and spaces where real talk is happening. Gloria Saldúa was a Chicana scholar, a poet, activist, and an inspirator of brown girls like me. And she talked about this area called Nepantla. And this is a concept or space of in-betweenness. When you are in Nepantla, in the middle of it, you learn also to see through the lenses of history. You see through the lenses of emotion and of spirit, and you learn to recognize these spaces. But also what happens within those spaces is what is important. Real talk, like double consciousness or like Nepantla, are not peaceful spaces where there's this bright light that guides you to the path of everlasting happiness, right? It's much the opposite. These are spaces of tension, of competing and sometimes opposing views coming into place. It is what we call borderlands, the metaphorical crossroads where you feel the tension and you feel pain and because there's dissonance, which is why you need that aspect of being vulnerable that I mentioned when I started. So I guess that I just described real talk in a very abstract manner. So I would like to give you a very concrete example. I'll start with a couple one where I've seen that have led to change. And again, this is couched within the context that we live in, right? That there are small pieces of change. So I will start one of the latest spaces I have been part of for real talk. This is a space for women of color, and we call it WOCA. It's an organization that some friends and I started, some colleagues, Katie Rosas and Dr. Zip Nguyen. We participated in the women's conference, and we realized that there were no spaces for women of color who were also leaders to support each other. So this was one of those spaces that felt very natural right away. There was real talk. Everyone shared experiences and found common ground, and in some cases provided sight to really new ground for our leadership. And while this was real talk in these meetings, I hope that you notice that the change was personal because we were all people of color. So that's why it felt very natural. So the other example I wanted to talk to is a change that has been more systematically and systemic in the work that we're doing around social justice at the place where I've worked for the last 16 years, which has been WIDA. It also started at a personal level. There were people of color and we were finding each other and where we could have these safe conversations, try to make this change. And again, the change was not necessarily happening as fast because while it was safe, we were all people of color. The difference was the leadership, because the talk was happening within the bounds of an organization and the leaders were being part of the conversation. So that started to create opportunities and actually incite others to engage in these conversations. So this was the work that we could not have done alone. So we brought experts. We brought Dr. Carl Grant, scholars like Dr. Anton Truer, partnerships with organizations, local organizations like the YWCA, who could help negotiate these spaces for real talk. They helped bring really people who had different privileges, I will call them, into these safe spaces for the conversation. So while we are having more real talk, we still have a long way to go. We've been going at it for years, and we are still in the process of transforming our internal talk into external actions and messages. Yet the change was because there was the leadership support and because there was the willingness to feel vulnerable. There was the ability to tell our white leaders when there were things that were hurtful. And also because everybody was in for the mission of multilingual learners, where there's the additional intersection of linguicism. There was a lot of work done by diverse groups. There were people of colors, there were white allies, and again, there were both people in the leadership and people on the ground. So as I reflect on these examples, there is a need I'm thinking for various ingredients for real talk to be successful. As I mentioned, vulnerability, engagement, especially of those who can exert change, and also the ability to see beyond what is. You really need to be able to have space to create a vision of what can be. And then the continuous effort, because it's not like check and we can move on. The work of change requires this long-term commitment. So after all this work was started a long ago, and our ancestors are not necessarily carrying us on their shoulders, but like my good friend, Dr. Lorena Mancilla likes to remind me, they're walking behind us, they're walking all around us.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that contribution. That's awesome. I'm loving this. This is really, really rich. As you talk about sort of these ingredients, vulnerability, engagement, seeing beyond what's there, the vision, and then that continuous efforts. I think about Dr. Kelly, whose work in the arts and other different spaces may take on a different form as it relates to real talk. So Dr. Kelly, can you talk to us a little bit about what real talk means to you and what you mean by real talk, and give us an example from your work and your spheres of influence, and how that can lead to real change as well, and what that looks like?
Well, first of all, real talk, I'm tired of surface talk. This has been going on for a very, very long time, and all of a sudden it took a man's knee on another man's neck to have particular conversations started in this country. Again, I am extremely, extremely exhausted from sitting on particular committees that have had to come up with these anti-racism statements and all of this, and it's just too much. And I can actually tell you that what needs to happen, most people don't understand what has to happen in acting and training of actors. It's not just about learning lines and such. And what it's really about is being able to understand how to illuminate a character. And now, I don't want to mention the schools. Over the past few years, there have been major training facilities in this country that have been in the news because the Black and brown, or let's just say the BIPOC students that have been there, have been raising issues and talking about the injustices and how they have felt marginalized and all that in this country. And I can actually say that from my experiences and what I always wanted to do with the kind of training that I had and the kinds of spaces that I operated in, I have been very fortunate, but I have never forgotten who I am. And this is something that is very important today, because most actors of color, I feel, are not being pushed enough to get to the particular kinds of depths that they need to. Now, there are many different reasons for that. First of all, the canon of what is considered the European canon, usually folks think of Shakespeare, Molière, the Greeks, and all of that. There are different canons that don't necessarily need to have any kind of heightened language. As in this country, canons are many other works besides A Raisin in the Sun, many other works besides all of these other writers that people think about. And these histories need to be embraced. When I started as an actor, I was lucky enough, two of the great acting teachers that I had, who are dead right now, they at the very least became entry-level behavioral scientists to be able to help unlock the complex problems that these students had with particular characters in these plays. And I'm not just talking about Black plays, but first of all, I don't believe in just you're playing, what does it mean to play Black? What does it mean to play brown? What does it mean to play white? You listen and you understand the given circumstances of a character. You filter your life through that particular character. But how do you get to that? That's what needs to happen, because I find that a lot of people are just being mediocre today, and the teachers are afraid to really push them. And I know this for a fact because I talk to a lot of graduate students and programs, and they tell me this. The history in this country for theater just is not about minstrelsy and A Raisin in the Sun. That's when people think about Black actors in this country. They say, oh yeah, well, the minstrelsy started in the 19th century and then we have A Raisin in the Sun. That certainly is not the case. And certainly people know who August Wilson is now in the larger sense because of everything that's been on television and all that sort of stuff, or Netflix. We have a slew and a plethora of other playwrights now that actors need to understand how to get into that text. And again, it goes back to language, and it goes back to how to understand the interior landscape of a character is denoted by the way that the language is written. Number three is that opportunities are there now. We are seeing more and more opportunities on cable for people. More writers are coming up, more producers are coming up, more directors are coming up. Folks know who Shonda Rhimes is. Folks know who Ava DuVernay is. There are a whole slew of people that are coming up that are giving opportunities. And on a side note, we just lost Cicely Tyson, who was a queen of let me just say, the art of theater and as an artist. And if you ever watched any of the scenes that she had with Viola Davis in How to Get Away with Murder, there's a particular way that those two supreme artists understood how to play the space between the notes, how to play the nuances, how to have their particular interior life come to life with what they were doing on the screen. Cicely Tyson, I'd seen her on the stage. I had met her in New York. She was an absolute queen. Real change again, empathy, vulnerability. It needs to happen. We can't just rely on the same old for these students to say, okay, but what does that have to do with me? How am I going to fit into this work? How am I going to fit into Shakespeare? There's some wonderful artists right now that are doing wonderful things to show that this country, to be inclusive and diverse, you need to have these classic texts filtered through very diverse experiences. That needs to happen in this country. Slowly but surely it is, but it needs to happen more. Let's see what I had here. I'm very serious about this training situation because this is, listen, I've been very fortunate in my career to have been in spaces where I'm the only one or two of people. I think I have some friends in Finland that are watching this right now, friends of mine in Russia who are watching this, and they understand because I've been in these training facilities where different cultural lenses, but we all understand about love, we all understand about joy, right? We all understand about pain. How do you help the individual actor understand what that is with particular text? And I don't want to sound like I'm old-fashioned because when I was coming up, the models that I had before internet was really big were James Earl Jones, Morgan Freeman, Gloria Foster, all of these, Hector Elizondo, Alma Martinez, all of these tremendous actors. And we just wanted to do the work. As a matter of fact, I'm at the University of Wisconsin here, one of the greatest actors in this country. Randall Duke Kim created the American Players Theater in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Hawaiian Korean, one of the greatest actors that this country had ever produced, and now here we are, 2021, talking about the same daggone thing again and again. And it's actually tiring. So just like Colin Kaepernick took a knee, whenever I stand in front of a group of people, where I stand in front of a class, I take a knee in a particular way because of the kinds of things that I've been exposed to and what I've written about. There's a book that I'm writing right now with my co-writer, co-author, and co-editor, Karen Kopranyowski. It's called The Embodiment of Text. And it's just, how do you get actors activated in these particular texts that they're going to be encountering? And I think I'll stop there because I don't want people to fall asleep because they think with acting, it's just getting up saying lines. It's a little bit more than that. It's a lot more than that.
No, you raised some very, very important points that to me highlight, I don't want to minimize what you're saying, but really the aspect of empathy and understanding walking in someone's shoes as it relates to, you know, not only the acting piece, but life and
life,
right? And so, you know, as you talk about acting, it makes me think of Miss Pelaban here, whose work spans both artistry and advocacy. And so I'm wondering if you could help us to understand what real talk means in your sphere, and how, and some examples from your work, and how that has led or can lead to real change.
So I've been in the Madison area for about 30 years, and I have found myself the only Black person in many spaces. And I have had to really work through what real talk means in those spaces. So as somebody was saying earlier, real talk amongst people of color, that I'm good at. I can feel that. I know what it is that is happening with that dynamic. But I'm gonna go through some practical things on what happens outside of that dynamic. So for me, real talk begins by real listening. The ability to speak about topics on a real level not only takes that lived experience, but an ability to reach beyond your experience and listen to those who are most impacted by what you are discussing. In that listening, you hear the solutions that are the most meaningful and impactful. Real talk also means elevating those who are most marginalized to speak, unless and until you are given leeway to speak for them, from them. So before I do real talk on anything and on any topic, I check myself and I check my privilege to be sure that I am the appropriate person to be speaking on that topic. And I do that to model that for white folks. Because quite frankly, many times people just think that they can talk about a subject. Well, they can't. So I start there. And then from there, I base my conversations with truth and empathy. Now, personal experiences mean that truth can feel different for each person. So I make sure to differentiate between anecdotal evidence from statistical evidence. So giving this personal story is powerful, but having the research to back up those stories is vital. We all know that what we see, think, and experience feels like it's the most truthful, but the intersections of oppression change what is traditionally thought to be a universal experience to a more individual one. One of the examples of how I managed real talk when everyone's truths felt different was navigating speaking with Madison Police's LGBTQ internal committee about outreach. LGBTQ centers asked to not have uniformed cops participate in the annual Pride event. We were one of the first in the nation to say, we will not have cops at Pride. And it was a very big deal here in Madison. It created a lot of conversation and a lot of, quite frankly, racist backlash towards the people who were putting out boundaries. So we started actually by listening. We started by listening to groups of trans, Black, brown, and Indigenous persons and what it is that they wanted and how it is that they felt about things. And then we decided to remove cops from Pride. So from there, we then had to talk to the cops about that. Now, this was not a conversation that they really wanted to have. This was not a conversation that they felt great about. But I went to their meeting. I listened to them. I did have empathy for what they were feeling because these were cops that identified as LGBTQ. And at that point, they were still wrapped in this idea that part of their identity was that uniform. So from that point, I spoke to them plainly about the impacts of policing on the LGBT community. I spoke about the history, not just of policing, but of Pride in specific. I gave them that perspective and focused not on the individuals, which is where they were focused on, but the systems. And systemically, you cannot argue that the impact, about this impact, even though it feels uncomfortable because you are a part of the system that has impact. And that's an important distinction. When you are a part of a system that causes harm, you have to recognize that harm is real and take yourself out of that conversation. Now, that was a hard conversation. However, we all walked out of there understanding what the perspective is and understanding why it was that we were doing it. And from that point, many of those people actually worked to de-escalate. I've taken this idea of justice and equity into everything that I do and speak about. So with the Rape Crisis Center, a lot of our real talk focuses around what justice means and what that looks like for victims of sexual violence. Now, traditionally, those conversations have centered around the legal system. But what we're finding more and more, when we listen to those most impacted, they are not wanting to engage in the legal system because 1, it's racist, 2, it's oppressive, 3, it places them in a position where they have to make choices that don't feel great. And sexual violence is complicated, and it's complicated when this person that you know has violated you. And is justice putting them in jail, or is justice something else? And we have decided for years what justice looks like for survivors, and we are working to dismantle that. How we're looking to dismantle that is community control through spaces. And that's hard because systems are in those spaces. And so I'm saying we got to get you out of those spaces. Does it make me very popular? Absolutely not. They are not particularly thrilled with the things it is that I have to do and say about removing systems from areas that then give power to survivors. So for the arts, for me, I got tired of the real talk because I was real talking myself all day long. So I decided to just do. So I've created my own company. I have co-created a theater festival that will be happening. We were sidelined by COVID, but we're coming back. I have created a community of actors and artists outside of the university, because I know the university has their thing, but outside of the university, I've created this community of Black artists to push our stories out there and to push our stories forward and to give ourselves the agency that we need in order to exist in this arts world here in Madison that really is dominated by white artists. And then lastly, I want to make the point that I show up in spaces as a Black woman. And me showing up in spaces as a Black woman means that there are perceptions that are placed upon me just by standing right in front of them. And I had to work through for myself how bold I could be. And luckily, I've been able to work through pretty easily for myself how bold I can be. I have been able to say, you know what? I've got to not worry about how people perceive me showing up in these spaces. I just need to show. And not only do I need to show, but I need to tell the truth. Now, that truth may not be comfortable, but that's not my problem. That's your problem. That is your issue. And I'm not going to take your issue and how it is that you take your perceptions of me and place that upon me. Instead, I am going to allow the width and breadth of everything that I am. And that includes my anger, that includes my happiness, that includes my sadness, that includes all of the things that I am. And I'm going to be there. And I'm going to say the things that I need to say. And if you don't like them, okay. It doesn't change what the truth is. So as an advocate, as an executive, and as an artist, I am showing up. And if I don't see what it is that I like, then I go and I do it myself. Because quite frankly, people ain't going to do it for you. So I'm going to go out there and make sure it happens.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Wow, this is pretty powerful. Took some significant nuggets from that. So thank you, Dana, for that. And as we think about sort of the work you're doing, particularly from an advocate standpoint as well, makes me think of our last but not least panelist, Dr. G, who has, through your work, through your advocacy, through Justified Anger, in other spaces, have been able to move the needle in Madison as well. And I want you to talk about a little bit about what it means to have real talk. I've read some articles, some very tough conversations, some tough words for our city leadership. And I'm wondering, if you could talk about that a little bit and give us a little bit of example and how some of that work has led to change for you as well.
Sure, Dr. Charleston, thank you so much for arranging this, you and your team, and for allowing me to be a part of it. I'm really excited and honored to be here, and particularly to be among such an esteemed group of panelists. I'll just say I'm a lifelong Madisonian, and I've always grown up in spaces where I was one or two Black students in an entire class. And not a lot of us, particularly a lot of us who are African American, can say we're from Madison. That has lots of disadvantages, as you might imagine, but also there are several advantages, because I have been trained in the same spaces, the same classrooms as my white colleagues. And so it's helped me to understand through my friendships and relationships, some of what my white colleagues think, how they process, how they feel. And so when I'm able to speak to issues, I try to speak to the heart of the issues, and not just what I'm imagining. I would say, first of all, Dr. Charleston, and to all of the special guests who are here today, I would say that real talk is disruptive, that it is not about the status quo. Now, the tough thing about going last is that everybody's said everything I've had that I wanted to say because they've just been on point, but it's about being disruptive. It's also about showing that we're not happy. There's a narrative that Black people, even back on plantations, were happy, and we were shuffling, and we did jigs, and there were salt shakers and aprons and little kitchen doodads that showed us smiling as if we had nothing better to do than to wait hand and foot on white people. And so real talk is about disrupting that idea that we're okay. Real talk is about not asking permission. It's just grabbing it and saying what needs to be said. Because if you have to ask permission to say it, then it's not real talk. You've already squelched your own voice by using it to ask, could it exist? And it's about really addressing and calling these things out. I think that this is really important to us. And so I want to talk about just some of the rules that have shaped my outspokenness, and then also give a few examples of it. I feel that if we're going to have real talk, we must establish autonomy. I was going to say our own autonomy, but that's redundant. We must establish autonomy, because if what you're saying is disruptive, then you've got to be able to have something to stand on when people come for you and when they come at you. Hold on, Dr. Charles, I'll make sure I got my timer on, because I don't want you to start dinging me when it's time to finish. And so how do you establish autonomy? You protect yourself so that you don't worry about the repercussions. So one of the things that I do is establish myself spiritually. And that's not, I'm not being ecumenical when I say that, but I mean in a real general sense. Who am I? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? Because if I sense that I'm in a space, that I'm in on this planet for some good, then I can't let people not liking what I do stop me. So I'm really talking about being grounded, and really in this space, whatever that is for you, whatever methodology that is, having a deep sense that you have the right, that you are enough to speak that truth. That's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, we establish autonomy experientially. I grew up in Madison. I've got to say this again. When I came to UW-Madison in 1981, I found out that my classmates' parents were the departments of all these chairs. And so the math department chair was Michael Wojcik, and the mechanical engineering chair were professors. I mean, his husband and wife, Rao. And I'm like, wow, those are Asha's parents. That's Nick's parents. So I realized that I've been raised in a very special place here in Madison, where in a campus setting, if you don't document it just right, if you don't footnote it just right, if you don't quote it just right, your whole argument can be shot down. I establish autonomy by saying, this is how I experience the world as a Black man. Don't tell me what somebody else said. Don't tell me somebody else Black in your committee said they don't feel this way. This is what I experience. Are they from Madison? Have they had these experiences? This is mine, so that people can't talk it. They can't talk it down. When I first wrote Justified Anger back in 2013, I realized that white people in Madison did not want to have a middle-class Black man with an earned doctorate degree living in Fitchburg in a house he built lament about the pressures of racial discrimination and disparity. Nobody wants to hear middle-class Black people, people of color, talk about it's not fair out here, but it's still real. And I realized that after the police pulled me over in my own church parking lot. The second time I was pulled over, told I was that I fit the profile of a drug dealer. I don't back down from that. I don't try to make apologies. My autonomy is in my experience, and I can create that. Secondly, it's socially. I work to build social capital and relational capital in the Black community, so that when I am speaking out loud and people try to come after me, I can just go and call my Black friends or do the special whistle or the special sign and have people backing me. I'm not going to be the Black leader out here alone on an island, because when you begin to disrupt organizations, particularly funding and funders and power brokers, people do come after you. So when they come after me, I'm ready. I have joined networks and organizations just so that people have my back, so that people don't screw with me, because I have too much to say and too much to do and too much is at stake. Next is emotionally. If you're going to have real talk, you have to dig in deep and not let people bully you, and not just bully you, not let their emotions sidetrack you. I'm a mama's boy. I'm sensitive. I can come off as strong and bold, but I'm sensitive. But I'm just being honest, because this is real talk. There's a thing that white men do when they're offended, and in my experiences running a nonprofit, many of my colleagues are white women. And when you start pushing the envelope really hard, there's and again, I'm not overgeneralization. So Dr. Charles, I'm trying not to let you get hate mail, but I'm telling you, when stuff comes up, let's say at UW, and we're talking about race, like that noose incident in the stadium, when we're there just saying, this is how we feel as Black people, the white people in the meeting, university officials started crying. It stopped the whole meeting. It was like, I thought we were further ahead than this. Look, this is homecoming. We're supposed to be here partying, seeing our Black friends, and you should be asking us to raise money. We are here talking about something that was egregious. It was protected under the guise of free speech. And now y'all are gonna start crying and completely disrupt the meeting from what Black people have paid and bought plane tickets to come here and talk to you. And now we're rubbing your backs and telling you it's okay. It's okay. You have to prepare yourself emotionally, because that stuff happens, and you have to keep speaking truth. I was trained to stop at that point, but to have real talk, I can't. And the other is economically. I found ways to step outside of the traditional ways of funding. I found ways to do it on the grassroots level. I've connected with people outside of Madison, outside of the state of Wisconsin. I've connected with folks who appreciate my voice and what we do from different ethnic backgrounds. And because I've diversified our sources of funding, I don't have to worry about one organization disrupting what we do because of what we say. Funders have come to me and they have said, Alex, when are you going to stop being angry? My funders, this is my funder. My funder is saying his funders are asking, when are you going to stop being angry and change the name of your movement to justified action and not justified anger? Because the idea of a Black man being angry was off-putting, and it was upsetting. And because he did fund me, but does not fund us to the degree that it can upset our organization, I was able to speak my mind. I was able to use my Black mouth to his white face and tell him exactly what was going on and what I thought and what I felt. I told funders, I will give you your 6-figure check back before you talk to me like I'm your boy and ask me to do a jig in here. I'm appreciative of money. I'm appreciative of your support, but you're not going to bring me up in this office in front of your boss and talk to me like I'm your hired hand, because I'm not. And I believe too much in the cause. And if you don't believe in this and don't fund it, I'll find someone else who does. But you are not going to demean me because you fund me. And that's, to me, that's real talk. Now, I held my breath and I said, Lord, don't let that white man take that check back. Now I'm going to be real talk. I said, Lord, don't let that white man come after this check, because I really did deposit it. I really did. But I had to make payroll, but I had to make him think. Now, the downside of it is he let an article be written about me that written me a new one. He let some stuff be said about me that he would not have written, but allowed it to happen. but what it did is pushed more conscientious and thoughtful folks in the community to come around our work. And so I found other people to be supportive of us. If I were to give an example of this, I'm running out of time, but I would say this. I love this Baldwin quote, and I'll paraphrase it. But I think he wrote it in '62 to the New Yorker from the regions of my mind. And he just said, basically, white folks, what you don't know about Black history, he actually said Negroes, what you don't know, then you don't know about yourselves. So don't study Black people to understand Black people. Understand Black people to understand systemic racism, that this country, the world power, was built by Black people for free, and then systematically, categorically created systems so that the very people who built this country cannot access its riches. So we've created a US Black history course using faculty, mainly white faculty, one African-American professor, Dr. Christy Clark-Pajara, Neil Kadesh, Steve Kantrowitz, and Alexander Shasko, to teach US Black history. It's a 9-week course, starts in February, goes until spring break just about. We've always done it in person. But because of COVID, we built an infrastructure, we put it online, and we have 1,700 learners. Our highest cohort was 270, the largest. It's now 1,700 paid participants. And I read the Baldwin quote on the first day. The other thing I say, and this is a quote I stole from my sister, I said, she says, we don't need white people to only think about how to tutor Black children. We need white people to talk to their children and not raise racist children. Because if we can just do that, that will stop a big part of the problem. So please don't come here thinking about how you can help, Tyrone and Shirley Ann. Who's talking to the young men in North Carolina talking about blood and soil? Who's talking to the folks who think that 50 years of affirmative action has stolen America from you, but 400 years of oppression means nothing, it has no relevance? And so we tell folks in those meetings, talk to your children, talk in your own group, because the participants want to talk to Black people to verify what we're talking about. So nope, white people must talk to white people. And we put our other ethnic specific groups together. And the last thing is go and talk to your broader community. Don't come and learn this and objectify this information. Talk to your board members, talk to your funders, talk to your elected officials. And we have found that by taking people through this history, we have mobilized, and in the process of mobilizing over 2,500 non-Black folks we call would-be allies to begin to use their voices to dismantle racism within their spheres of influence, because it is not my job to do that among white people. It is my job to create the space to learn and to be mobilized, but it is the job of white folks to do the work of working with white folks. And that real change has helped us to see an impact in our funding, in the expansion of our programming, and within the seriousness with which our program and our efforts are taken.
Wow. The exciting part about all this and you all completing this session is that it's not over. So I'm excited to to pass this over to my colleague, Dr. Lisa Barker, to engage the community, to engage you all. So I'll turn this over right now.
Thank you, Dr. Charleston, and thanks for everyone who's been able to offer questions in the chat or private message with questions. And thank you to the panelists for bringing interdisciplinary, multi-generational, multi-organizational perspectives to Real Talk. Tension that we had observed on our end, listening to y'all. One is that, for folks of color, like participating in Real Talk requires a level of boldness and being unapologetic, authenticity. At the same time, Mariana mentioned the importance of keeping conversational talk spaces safe for folks of color, because my paraphrasing, there's going to be a risk to that. And I feel like that sentiment was echoed by Dr. Cepeda Capistran in the chat when they said that sometimes Real Talk for folks of color means risking everything, including employment and livelihood. So a question that surfaced around that is, and I might start with Dr. Green, if that's all right, is what recommendations, whether it's policies or actions or things that individuals can do or organizations can do to help make sure spaces are safe for folks of color to be bold and unapologetic and offer that gift to the community? How do we keep it safe for folks?
Yeah. So I'm over here taking notes too, listening to all the panelists. One of the things that we talk about with schools, at least me, is thinking about under what conditions, like what creates the conditions, right, for um, for white supremacy and for racism to continue to be perpetuated, right? And so oftentimes we think about outcomes in education, but we don't think about the organizational conditions that foster that. So in part, for schools, we have to be thinking about what are the organizational conditions, what are the organizational routines, what are the organizational structures that create space for Black freedom. Essentially, that's what like Black freedom, freedom from oppressive systems, but also freedom to, right? Freedom to be to be just who we are. So I think initially about targeting and dismantling conditions that get in the way of that. But again, to me, this goes back to the flipping of the dynamics of power, right? If the same old people are making the same old decisions in the school under the guise and under the cloak of equity and now anti-racism and I like whatever the word you want to use, social justice, but like this, the same people are controlling the same things, then you haven't gotten to it, right? And so I think is inverting that power dynamic to make sure that Black people are centered, are central, and they're supported with the organizational conditions to do what they need to do. And I just want to echo this point that kept coming up earlier. Like there, even now with at a university and what is this, we have to create our own economic infrastructure, right? I mean, I'm just at the point that I feel like is a waste of time and it's so exhausting to continue to try to disrupt racist systems. I'm at the point now, I would much rather just build our own and our collective. And I'm not saying either or both and, but it's such exhausting and I would rather reallocate my strength to constructing and building. And so, yeah, to answer your question, the conditions piece, but also centering the power dynamic where Black folks, people of color are centered.
Thank you, Dr. Green. I'd like to hear other folks weigh in on ways that they can imagine or have experienced spaces that felt safe. And if you can even like deconstruct, how was that safety established? And how do we operationalize that?
Yeah, I would like to say that it takes strong leadership. It is in the leadership that can move like whole systems forward. Representation in leadership, voices in leadership are important. In the second example that I had mentioned, our whole leadership was white. I was the first person of color in that job and the first bicultural member. I was the first English language learner. And I had to go to Alabama. I had to go to North Dakota. I had to go and talk about linguicism, talk about language development for multilingual students. So I was not very popular. And I had people comment specifically about my skin, about my accent. I think what took the number one thing that I thought changed was it took ideological clarity, and ideological clarity meaning from the leadership, understanding where they stood and what they were willing to stand for. In my case, we're working with multilingual learners. If you were not willing to invite into the leadership or even into the organization when I first started, people of color, people who had an accent like mine, they would not have been doing the work ethically. So I think it takes courage, whether you're a person of color or whether you're a white ally, it takes courage for the conversations and for the action to move forward.
I can honestly say, pardon me, was someone talking? I can honestly say that I had a situation happen to me, but I've always been I grew up in a tough neighborhood in New York City where most of the guys that I grew up with are dead. So I've always been a warrior. I remember that I heard this word, I heard a sentence addressed to me that there was a perception about me. And I said, a perception? Uh-huh. So I closed the door and I knew that the voices were going to be raised. And then there was somebody in the upper administration that was saying, it doesn't matter whatever I say. And then I let out a couple of F words. I knew I was going to be called down to the dean's office. I was called down to the dean's office and I was questioning policy. And the dean was trying to be magnanimous. I'm not even going to mention the school. And the dean was trying to be magnanimous. And he said, well, Baron, I think there's a problem here. And I said, well, I just have a question about this particular policy. That man raised his voice to me like you would have thought that he was talking to a piece of dirt. Raised his voice to me and I saw the vein pop out of his head. And then I asked him, I said, why are you raising your voice at me? I just asked you a question. That's when he went to DEFCON 10. In the military, that means when you go to extreme warning, Will Robinson, danger. I got up from that chair and I said, you know what? I'm out of here. I went to the provost's office and I said, you know what? Diversity means a hell of a lot more than just having a couple of people of color floating around on this campus. Well, this man looked like he was going to cry. I'll talk. I don't want this job. I don't need this job. But that's me, though. And I know a couple of other people that have been warriors and warrioresses where they just have refused to, for whatever their situations have been, to be talked to certain ways. I have a friend of mine that I just talked to on the phone that's experiencing something at one of the major schools in California. And I told her what she has to do. So, but it also takes guts. And the same way that Dr. G was saying, you have to be able to stand up and be, you know, got to be on your own 2 feet.
You know, if I could just jump in and just piggyback on what Professor Kelly is saying, you know, we're asking, how do we create safe spaces for real talk? You know, if Baldwin, Rosa Parks, Ida B. Wells, you know, Mary McLeod Bethune, A. Philip Randolph, if these people waited for safety to do stuff, we would have no Black history. We would have no American history. So, yo, like, what are we really trying to do? So are we trying to create safety so that, you know, it's like, do you warm the pool so that you don't have to jump in on the deep end when it's cold? Do you drain it so that it's shallow? Real talk is about the safety is you have been honest to your voice, and that's how change has happened. I'm tired of being in a space where we're talking about make it safe for the next generation by speaking. That's what we got to do. But trying to protect ourselves, these folks need us more than we need them. So we got to be able to speak up and push this stuff, because when people understand we're not backing down, when we can go beyond the dean to the provost, and when we demonstrate we know that.
That's right.
What I've done is I've built relationships with the people who fund my funders. It's like what we do on eBay and stuff. We remove the middle person and we go straight to the distributor. I go to their funders. And so now when they're saying, well, I'm like, you know what, that's all right, because we playing tennis on Saturday anyway. You know what, me and my wife are going over there for dinner anyway, and I'd be sure to drop that. You know, before you didn't want to introduce me to, that's really okay. I probably can introduce you to him. You know, you want me to sell? I got his address, because they need to understand who and what they're dealing with. And I think when we are propped up as professional, educated people of color, that cannot be a muzzle on us, that we then forget that we are there because somebody did lose something. So to want what they gave us without paying what they did makes us as evil and slothful as the people who are blocking us. And so we have to understand who brought us here, why are we here, and we got to be able to do that. And it's time to clean house. And it's not if we keep shuffling and not speaking truth, because somebody else, if they release us for speaking truth, somebody will hire us for speaking it.
Thank you, Dr. G. I did want to make space, Dana, for you if you wanted to add to this past year. We're exploring around safety and how we establish that, if it's even desirable.
So I agree with everything that Dr. G said. First off, there is not such thing as a safe space. I have yet to find one, because as long as there is oppression, there is not safety. Beyond that, what I do for my staff of color is I put myself in those spaces and push to make room. So I may not be safe, but I work to make sure that those that are under me and those that come up behind me have the benefit of me placing myself in that space and being that barrier between them and that oppression, and creating spaces that don't allow in oppressive systems. And that's what I've been doing for survivors, is creating spaces without oppressive systems. I can't create safety, but I can create spaces.
Thank you for that. Another pattern we've been observing as we listen in is which I didn't anticipate, but of course, is this connectedness between real talk and economics. Like across multiple speakers, we've talked about how that's tied to both capital and social capital. And then it connects a little bit with John's recent question, which is, I'm pointing because it's visible in the chat, at least on my end. And that's sort of moving into the K-12 space. What strategies are available to K-12 school districts to assist them in advocating for resources for children and or amplifying the voices of children and being able to engage in real talk themselves? So we're interested in sort of unpacking resources in terms of funding, but in terms of social capital and ways to lift up young people in the work of real talk. And Dana, you're still visible on my screen, but I didn't say your name yet, but I wondered if you wanted to speak to this first or if you wanted to have a moment to think.
So for me, you know, again, when you are talking about what needs to happen for children and how it is that works with the school systems, you have to go to the source of the power. So who are we electing? Who are we putting in positions that determine money? What are we doing about what is happening with district lines? What are we doing on the political level to make sure that the people who are determining what is going on with our money are the people that we want in place? When you are supporting candidates, are you supporting candidates of color? Are you running for office and you are not a person of color, and there's a person of color that is as qualified or even not as qualified, but you need to support that candidate of color? I don't think that the traditional paradigm of how things have gone so far and who gets the power should continue to move forward. You know, whiteness has built the concept of what power is and what that looks like, at least here in America. So how do we take that back? And for me, one of the things that I think about is local control. Who am I electing to my local offices? Who am I putting in the city council? Who am I putting on the school board? Then we go to who is my local representative in the local Senate and congressional. Then we go to federal. Who is that? But you have to start with what is happening exactly in your community and hold those people accountable and vote in the people that have not had access to power, because that is how then you are going to get the information. That is how you're going to get the experiences that are not the traditional white experience. Yeah, those are all the words I have on that.
Awesome. Thank you for orienting us to the sort of political and legal levers that we should really focus on and keeping that local and the power that has. What are other perspectives y'all have on ways to strategies to keep strategies that are available for K-12 school districts to assist them in advocating for resources? What are other levers, I guess, of change that y'all have encountered or seen successful?
I wanted to build on what Dana talked about, but at the school level, and the representation. We need to hire leaders who are people of color. We need to hire teachers who are people of color. These are uncomfortable situations because it means that some teachers will, you know, as they retire, there will not be other white teachers who are part of the mainstream. But it's like sometimes when I talk about leadership of people of color, it's like we all have priorities. And it may not even be that visibly we are creating those priorities, but when you're a person of color, you're visibly and consciously and you're aware of the importance of that. So for me, my filter will always be people of color, will be multilingual people. So as we create spaces for leadership of people of color, then we will have those priorities raised to the top. And then once you get those people into the door, you need to identify retention. What are the career paths? It's not good if a lot of our people of color are in all these entry-level positions, or are, you know, not that they shouldn't be visible everywhere, but they should be visible in leadership. Dana talked about supporting her staff. That is part of what social capital gains you, right? So how are we supporting a people of color in our schools? How are we creating those connections so that they feel it's not just the support, is the earning and gaining and learning what is it, how the system works and how they can advance. So to me, representation will get us a long way, and students will, it's not just for the students, it's for the whole community.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. Did anyone else want to speak to this question about levers for change in the K-12 sector?
Well, I was gonna to the question as I understood it around, like, you know, how do school districts get additional resources for, I'm not sure what it was about, but so, you know, this isn't a popular answer, so to speak. So I went to a school district and they asked me the question, so I gave the answer. So one of the things Dr. King used to always say is that budgets are moral documents. And so if school districts will look at their current budgets and start to defund programs, offices, positions that are not in support of Black liberation, racial equity, anti-racism, because it is problematic to me that you would spend $2 million on a police department, but will spend 500,000, if that, on some just little diversity. I can't even call it like racial equity, right? And so you can say you got a racial equity statement, you can say I got a racial equity policy, but your power financially with your resources are antithetical to that, right? And so like if school districts, I mean, because see, people don't want to give anything up. Like there is a debt that is owed. There is repair that has to be done. And this is what I'm saying. Like, I don't know how much longer I can last in these institutions because you got to give up what you got, right? So like, but they don't want to defund that because they're in school districts all across this country. There are white interests that keep school districts constrained. And so they are afraid that, well, white people gonna leave and white people gonna move and white people gonna come up here and raise hell and white people gonna, and until you are ready to defund or to give back or give up that which supports racism and anti-racism, this thing, we thought, oh, we love data. Well, the data just showed you that the schools with the SROs are the schools with the majority of Black and brown kids. The data just showed you having an SRO doesn't cut down on what you perceive as violence. And so what I had to realize here in Austin, when we were talking about school closures, these people don't care about data. I sent them 50 dang on articles about what happened when you close a school in a Black community. This is about power for these people, right? And until you get to the money, the budget, you ain't getting to the power. So we can window dress racial equity all we want to, but it's nothing more than white supremacy cloaked in equity.
Thank you for that. Terry put in the chat, just lifting up what you were saying about budgets being moral documents and that being a high leverage starting place to check ourselves and see what do we really literally value and how does that shake out in our systems. Thank you for that. We had several folks have talked about leadership sort of conceptually and then how that shakes out in our organizations. And I thought I'd start with Dr. G around this question to sort of unpack leadership together. But the question is, if someone is a leader, how do we balance leadership with supporting others to take ownership of the work, find their power and confidence to do that and even lead themselves? And again, I'll read it again and I'll also copy it in the chat, but if someone is a leader, how do we balance leadership with supporting others to take ownership of the work and find their own power and confidence to do that and even lead?
Great question, Dr. Barker. I would say that the definition of leadership in my perception is doing just that. So if you have to help someone or force someone to do that, you're not dealing with a leader. I think when you consider something like transformational leadership, it's about understanding that your experiences are really about getting out of the way, helping someone else to step into greater places of influence while you get a chance to resource them, invest in them, cheer them on, because the truest form of leadership development is giving people a chance and space to lead. When I started my nonprofit 30 years ago, I feel like I was a kid. I was in my late 20s, and I found it very difficult to have people come alongside me to show me how to do what I was trying to do. Some of it was because those who knew how to do it were so busy on their own grind. A lot of my mentors were white women and white men who taught me how to build boards, how to raise money, how to set up organizations, and gave me access to their contacts. And so when I finished grad school, I said, if I'm ever fortunate enough, I'm going to create leadership space for Black leaders so that I can not only teach what I've learned, but give them access to my contact and not broker those relationships. So now for the past 5 years, we have, through our Justified Anger initiative, we have created the Justified Anger Leadership Institute. And organizations, the school district, various organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, nominate someone and pay their tuition for a 9-month course where they spend 1 day a month with us all day. And we bring in some of the key Black influencers to come and talk, whether it's Dr. Ruben Anthony or Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings or General Marsha Anderson. We will bring Dr. Jack Daniels. We will bring people in to talk, to teach them how to navigate white space in some place like Madison. We create that Black space where we do it. And then we give them access to these people so they don't have to feel like, can you introduce me to Dr. Gloria? Can you introduce me to Dr. Daniel? They come, they can ask them, can I get your business card? Can I call you? Can I have coffee? Because sometimes when we say we're building leaders, the people underneath us need to go through us to have access. And so how do I bring people into meetings with me? And how do I help them to grow and invest in that? And the other thing I'll say is, as leaders, we need to understand how to staff ourselves with folks who can exceed what we're doing. A large part of our work is reentry, and that's helping men and women reenter society after spending time in prison. And what I have found is that there's a gentleman on my team who I had to promote to vice president. Now, he doesn't have a degree, hasn't completed his degree. I met him when he was in criminal activity. I knew what his background was, but I found that he was able to get his life together, but he was able to use the intelligence that had been perverted, the leadership skills that had been perverted and used for illegal gain and to harm people in the community. He brought that same level of brilliance into fundraising and to strategic partnerships. He came to me with an idea to reconfigure our partnership with the Department of Corrections, with the house that we own, and the Department of Corrections rents beds from us from 30 to 60 days. I said, all right, you need to make sure that it's all on the up and up because I'm not going to prison. And so you're not getting me in trouble, so you better make sure it's right. He put it together, and I even asked him to pitch it to the Department of Corrections. In refiguring that, our new contract with them was 6 figures. I was able to pay him full-time salary out of a deal he negotiated. But if he were simply my underling and you give me the ideas and let me go and carry them, let me schmooze with these folks, his work started showing, a month ago, the governor pardoned him for all the things that he's done. He was appointed by the governor to be on the board that supervises the public defender, the state's public defender, Kelly Thompson. And so by giving him room to see his leadership within the community and our organization, others in the community are able to see that and take advantage of it. So I feel that that's the definition of leadership. And if that's difficult for people, what she said.
Can I quickly just say, Dr. G has been one of the people that has been a leader to me. I met Dr. G when I was a teen. He used to come to our church, and he was one of the first and only Black folks that I had seen in the churches here in Madison, and his incredible example allowed me to feel like I could do the things that I did because of Dr. G. So I want to make sure that that shout out goes to Dr. G, because he was very influential for young Black girls like me.
Dana, you're sweet. Laleda told me she met you, and my sister told me she met you, and that somehow we're going to get a chance to meet. Thank you. Thank you. Is that Dr. Charleston laughing at me? I'm kidding.
No,
I'm kidding.
that was Professor Kelly. That was not me.
I know, man.
Thank you for that. I mean, what I'm hearing loud and clear, and what Dr. G is saying is, like, leaders have to be able to, like, observe and discern and make space to lift up the talents of their colleagues, and the example that he provided. And I wanted to offer space for other panelists. We have about 3 more minutes in our Q&A segment to sort of offer other insights into observations they've had in the leadership space, or experiences they've had that they felt have opened up spaces for real talk and real change, in addition to that quality that Dr. G was unpacking for us. Baron, I don't know, you're muted on my end.
With the Odyssey project here, over the past 18 years when I've come up here, I've seen tremendous transformation that Emily Auerbach and her team has done with people over the past 18 years. And now one person is an alderman, another person is on the board of regents at the UW-Madison system, or the UW system. Absolutely tremendous. And those voices are very important once people in particular situations take ownership of their own individual voice of what we're saying and speaking the truth. And these people are being let in these spaces. So, I mean, I've seen that firsthand, certainly here in Madison, Wisconsin.
Thank you, Professor Kelly.
No, I've seen it.
Other ideas, Dr. Green or Mariana, or Dr. Castro, about other aspects of leadership you found to be liberating?
No, for me, I mean, after hearing Dr. G talk, that was exactly what I was going to say. You lead from where you are. You lead from where you are, and then you pave the road for others. Just like him, for me, my leadership has been offered. I'm very grateful for all the leaders that I work with, because they've given me space to grow. And you learn to lead by leading. Nobody. Oh, Dr. Green, you really made an impression on me, because I keep thinking about the pool. So leadership is very similar, right? You can tell someone about swimming, but it's not until you jump in the pool. And we have to be gracious. We have to support each other.
That's right.
So yeah. So I would just repeat everything that Dr. G said. I would say ditto.
There are still haters out there. Still haters out there, boy. Woo!
Go ahead, Dr. Green.
Well, I think so. One of the things, because I teach in a leadership department, so we, prepare school leaders and district leaders and stuff like that. And I think one of the things which this conversation is underscoring is moving beyond a leader and thinking about leadership. So part of the things we try to get our principals to think about, what's the organizational leadership beyond you as the leader, right? And so in social movements, there is this idea of having leaderless organizations, leader-led organizations, and then leader-full organizations. So that's one of the things people talking about, Black Lives Matter, like, well, who is the leader? Well, they still have like this civil rights hierarchical structural notion of leader versus a plural collective notion of leaderful, right? So I think the practice of creating space for leaderful organizations shifts power, but it also creates this space and these opportunities where people can have the opportunity to get into the pool to start to swim, because a leader isn't hoarding that, but sharing that as a leadership.
Thank you for that. I really am fascinated by how you're teasing apart the nuance in the word leadership, leaderful. I invite anyone, if you have readings or resources that you'd want to get out to folks, to offer that in the chat, and we can share that after the event. I did want to hand it over to Dr. Charleston. We're going to be making space for folks to provide closure to the event and offer some closing thoughts and a survey. Dr. Charleston, it's all you. You're muted.
I said, are we at the end already? This has been a wonderful time, a very impactful and thought-provoking session. I am elated to have had the opportunity to engage here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to engage with both the panelists and my community here today. I was peeping some of the things in the chat, very important contributions to the conversation. You all have truly helped me, and I'm going out on a limb and say maybe all of us, to really unlock the power of language, of our voices, of our efforts, of our activism, to truly promote equity in our communities, our schools, and even our workplaces. There were places in this conversation where I almost thought I was at church, right? I almost shouted, right? But I think that reaction is normal when what's being said touches the very core of your soul, right? It can happen through music, it can happen through ministry, it can happen through a bunch of things. Sometimes, talking about race and racism and social and racial justice is hard, it's difficult, it's challenging, right? We have experts on our panel who are experts for a reason, right? To be sure, it's not fun, right? But it's necessary. And sometimes we aren't sure if we're saying the right thing. We aren't sure if we have the right skills to say what we need to say and how we need to say it. And it's this conflict, right? At times internal conflict that impedes our ability to use our voices to really unlock the power of real talk to make real change, right? But as Dr. G mentioned, real talk is not only disruptive, but we must disrupt the idea that we're okay, right? We got to show up and tell the truth that Dana Pelaban encourages us to do. But if we didn't know before this session, we're definitely now aware of some valuable tools that can help us communicate in meaningful ways. We recognize that in order for us to be successful, it may entail deep reflection, right? And personal growth on our end, right? To be effective communicators, right? To particularly around these tough subjects. This might be the space where we learn how to illuminate a character, as Professor Kelly posited for us, right? We've learned that communication isn't always as simple as just kind of saying what you mean, right? We know that, how, when, where we say what we mean is integral to the success of our communication efforts, and may differ whether you're at school, at work, or in our communities, as Dr. Castro shared. We know that these are often not peaceful spaces, as she told us, right? These are spaces of tension and pain because there is dissonance. And so, the use of language in our voices, are, in other ways, a social learned behavior, right? It's a social behavior. So how we speak and listen, as Dana talked about, right, are deeply influenced by our cultural experience, but our autonomy is our experience, right, Dr. G? When I think about, Terrence Green, Dr. Green just mentioned social movements. And when I think about the most successful social movements it's a variety of actions that are strategically deployed to ensure success. Dr. Green instructed us that real talk, real dialogue must lead to action, invert the dynamics of power, and must lead to racial justice. That is to be more, that is to say more than just real talk, right? Professor Kelly said it best, and he spoke for many of us when he said, I'm tired of real talk, right? So if you use the analogy of like a broken clock, right, it's correct twice a day. So if we only use one tactic or strategy for social racial justice, it may only work sometimes. And oftentimes, if we get fixed on this one strategy or one method or one way to promote change, it will exemplify a sort of rigidity that may cause tension with even allies who would otherwise be helpful in achieving our desired outcomes. So like Dr. G said, we must work to build social capital in the Black community and other BIPOC communities to ensure we're not on an island. So if we are to be successful in enacting change, we likely need a broader strategy that employs efforts both within the system and outside of the system. Sometimes there's this false dichotomy that you're either in the system or you're not. But actually, as Dr. Castro explained, real talk for us, and then having leaders engage in these real talk efforts to help move the agenda forward, right? So, in each of our panelists' narratives, they all had a bunch of things in common. But one thing that stuck out to me, they all worked with people to enact change. So one way to create powerful change is by working together, help, building relationships, and allows, folks to engage in critical dialogue about issues related to social and racial justice that are typically challenging for some of us to even broach, right? Dr. G was in that situation. He thought he wasn't going to get funded, and then he might have had a little bit of backlash, but because he had a relationship, right, he was able to engage in that difficult conversation as well. And to be sure, all of us is 180 something people on here. I'm not as eloquent as any of these folks on here, right? And I want to be sure to relay that that's not who you have to be, but you have to be yourself. And I believe we gained some critical insight as to not only the value of critical conversations and engagement, but indeed the power of real talk to make real change. I particularly appreciate the additional tools that I've gained to utilize both in my personal and professional life. And we can, part of having this community and being in this space is, I know we're virtual right now, but the idea, when the apocalypse is over, we're going to be together, right? We'll get some food and all kinds of things, but we've learned that we can tap into the richness of our community. We can reach, teach, embolden, empower ourselves, and importantly, today's youth, and help to resound our voices and individual and collective power to make change. I hope this symposium has helped each of us to better understand how to engage, all of our tools, not just our voices, to write the path to and through achieving equity. We can use our voices to help solve problems. We can reflect on the values of our shared experiences and demonstrate the strength in our communities. There's power in our ability to use one another as resources. We don't have to know it all. We don't have to be the most eloquent person in the room. Like I mentioned, everybody on the panel is much more eloquent, than I am. But we can lead from where we are and pave the way for others, as Dr. Castro just reminded us, right? So what concepts can we adopt and adapt from the power of real talk to make change in our own lives, our own spheres of influence? Let's continue to reflect on our own practices that can work toward advancing equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. We look forward to seeing you all at our next RTRC Equity Symposium series. It's going to be on March 25th, entitled Centering the Whole Child in Teaching and Learning. And so let's continue to support each other, to learn, to grow with and from one another. And I would like to thank all the panelists, the facilitators, place staff, Justin Brown from OEDI, and to all of you who participated in this event. And a special thanks to the Wisconsin Center for Education Products, known as WICEPS, and the School of Education's Impact 2030 initiative for sponsoring this event. Also, thank you to Dean Hess for being our fearless leader and supporting us in all of our efforts. And I always quote, I use it all the time. Folks who know me, they're probably tired of me using it, but I think it's relevant in a lot of different spaces, right? Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can indeed change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's from Margaret Mead. Thank you all again for coming. Have a great and blessed evening. I think we have JB, do you want to okay. JB, you want to, what do we have?
We have the survey in the chat, Dr. Charleston, and I realized I had skipped over the closing question for our panelists, so about what they took away from other folks on the panel. So as we, as folks are already in the survey and filling that out, a question that we love to close with in these conversations, I just put it in the chat, but it's giving y'all as panelists a space to answer what is one insight gained from the work or experiences of other panelists that you will take with you today. We'll we'll give everybody, maybe we'll start backwards with Dr. G and kind of go back through the sequence and give y'all space to sort of name something that struck you as folks are completing our survey and we're closing out today.
Wow, there's so much. Can I go after Dr. Green?
Yes.
No,
I'm
you
an
gonna preach.
improviser.
Look,
I say yes to everything.
look, between the two of y'all, one of y'all gonna preach. So, you know.
Well, let me just start by saying it's been wonderful to meet everybody, and definitely affirmation, and that I'm not alone in this quest that I've been on, and it's been just wonderful with all this with these different voices, and it's just been absolutely wonderful for me. Affirmation.
Now I want to shout out to Mariana, who in her initial talk was talking about the spaces that BIPOC people have together and that real talk that we are there. And when I was thinking of this, I was thinking about outside of ourselves, and she brought that back into ourselves, and I deeply appreciated that reminder.
After 31 years of living in Wisconsin, I still feel affirmed and energized from spending time with people of color. The fact that we together are not alone, like Dr. Kelly said, gives me hope. And then the inspiration that it is time right now for moving from the real talk to the real change. You know, we live, breathe, and love education. We're part of the #1 school of education. Sorry, Dr. Green. And, you know, according to me, the world, go Badgers. But in my little side of the world, we are helping educate the children and the youth who will lead our future. And many of them are Black and brown, just living with FRERE. Education is socio-political. And I don't mean partisan. We are working with the children so they can not just feed our societies, but so that they can transform it. So I am very, very honored to have been part of this panel. Thank you.
I'll just jump in and just say I was energized by the boldness of each of my fellow panelists' voice, and just hearing a resounding message that I too am just tired of talking for talk's sake.
Yep.
That real talk has got to really move something. And just I heard that in different ways through each of the panelists.
I was just going to say, first, I didn't know my brother, Dr. Charleston, was a preacher. I felt like that was a mini sermon. I was going to tell Dr. G, he don't have to worry about preaching this Sunday because Dr. Charleston will be in the pulpit. I was get him a rag, let him preach. But no, I'm so profoundly just grateful and thankful. You know, like a virtual homecoming, coming back to UW to, you know, share space with all of you all. So thank you all for having me. So thank you so much.
Well, and thanks so much to you all. We've been so excited to be with y'all. I know that Dr. Charleston often has some music queued up for us to be together with as we close out and folks complete those surveys. But I just want to say thank you so much again for your work, for being with us for this homecoming. Thank you so much, everyone.